Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews Saturday Conversation Show, an interview series where I talk to entertainment personalities, content creators, and filmmakers about their work and love of film. For today's show, though, we're going to do something a little different. Going to look into the life and career and legacy of Robert Redford, the Oscar-winning director, filmmaker, actor, environmentalist, legacy maker with the Sundance Film Festival. He passed away, sadly, a few days ago. It leaves behind a really rich legacy in film. Really, his impact on the whole industry as a whole is quite incredible. And talking to me today about all things Robert Redford is Associate Professor Bruce Isaacs. He's a senior lecturer in film studies at Sydney Uni. And you can also check out his podcast, Film versus Film, season 4, available now everywhere you go. I'm going to have the link in the show notes for people to check it out. If you're going to type it out, make sure Versus is Versus, Film versus Film, season 4. And yeah, it's good. Bruce, it's so great to be able to talk to you today, all things Robert Redford.
Thanks so much, man. Thanks for the lovely introduction. Like you, I was kind of shocked. Redford has meant so much I have a love of Hollywood. My area of work is Hollywood, right? And
Mm.
Redford is maybe in the top few people that for me signify Hollywood in such an iconic way. So thank you for reaching out. This is really lovely.
The thing about Redford that I admire is that he was around for a very long time. I think that 60s he did TV work and then he became a star and but every decade he made a mark in some way or another, whether as a filmmaker and as an actor. And I kind of had to think back about what was the first time I kind of like had the Robert Redford experience. And I always, when I was young, so when in the 80s and such, when I grew up, the stuff I was watching when I was like, a kid and stuff, was like
Yeah.
more your Hollywood action kind of stuff. So Redford was kind of like did very different movies to that. And so it would have been when I was in my late teens, maybe close to early 20s. And funny enough, when I found out about, knew more about Redford, it was actually through Dustin Hoffman. I went through a bit of a Dustin Hoffman phase. I was watching everything Hoffman, and then All the President's Men comes up. And while I knew Redford as a person in the pop culture sphere, I haven't really kind of sat down and watched any of his movies really from beginning to end. And that kind of started my Redford sons, if you could say that. And after that comes, the Sting and Butch Cassidy and everything else. But All the President's Men to me is a fantastic movie because I think when it comes to Redford as an actor, he kind of like brought a lot of things about him um, politically, but also in the work as well. Because I think here for a long people thought he was just like a pretty face, but people at around that time in the 70s especially, that's when you see the intelligence come to work as well, and something I really appreciate about what he brought to the table. What about yourself, Bruce? When was the first time you had the Robert Redford experience?
I mean, it's a great question. Look, I agree with you entirely. You're right. Redford was I think I first probably saw Redford in maybe something a bit earlier, right? Maybe the way we were. My
Mm,
mom was really into, she loved Robert Redford, right? So I grew up with that. But All the President's Men, like you, is a touchstone for me. I still think it's one of the greatest films America ever made.
yeah,
And
me
that
too.
was the moment where I think I clocked this idea that Redford was more than just the leading man. Like he was often thought to be this good-looking, suave, very sophisticated leading man. So he would play people like Jay Gatsby. But when I saw All the President's Men, and look, I would have seen it as a younger person, but I wouldn't have really understood it very well. I
Yeah.
think I would have encountered it because, I grew up with watching a lot of movies. I think it's when I understood that this is actually a defining moment of not just about American cinema, but about America itself. That I thought, okay, this Redford guy is interesting because I'd probably by that time seen Butch Cassidy. That was really
Mm,
important to me. But can I say the defining moment for me with Redford was I was about 18. I know this, I vividly remember it because it was 1994, and this was the year of Pulp Fiction.
right.
And everybody either went for Pulp Fiction or Forrest Gump, and they were like the
Mm,
two poles of what pop culture was doing in Hollywood that year. But I loved Quiz Show.
yeah.
To this day, I think it's a tragedy that Quiz Show has been this kind of forgotten Look, I'll just say, I think it's one of the great political films that was ever made in Hollywood. Robert Redford made that movie. And at that point, he was, that's the movie that goes back to All the President's Men. They are perfect companion pieces. And Redford had a hand in both. So Chris was for me maybe the moment where I thought he's not only important, but he's maybe one of the critical figures in the modern Hollywood history. And look, I still periodically watch it. I love that entire world of the film.
I was actually watching it last night.
Oh, is that right? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a while since I saw it, and I'm reminded about how great John Turturro was. Ray
Oh,
Fiennes
wow.
did that right after Schindler's, so I think a lot of people kind of interested to see what he would do, and he just put in such a charming performance. And so many great character actors, Hank Azaria, Christopher McDonald, like so many people in that film. It's crazy how good that movie is,
All
and
stars.
it flows so well as well.
Yeah, it's an all style of filmmaking where you've got the idea of um, it's very All the President's Men. All the President's Men is kind of set in the newsroom, right? This is set in the TV station.
Mm.
It's set in the university campus. And so it's about these American institutions where power goes through it, but in pretty secretive ways. And that has always been a theme for Redford. I mean, Redford, you can't do All the President's Men, immerse yourself in that world and not want to engage in, well, what was going on in America? And he simply changes direction and decides, well, what happened with television and the rise of American corporations? But you're absolutely right. Well, one other thing I just want to say very quickly, it's for people who don't know, it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
And the figure, the Ray Fiennes character, was actually quite a significant academic, a literature professor at Columbia. And many years later, when I was an undergrad, or maybe I was even an honor student, I went and got his book on
Mm.
classical literary theory and read that book. And interestingly, it made me feel so much closer to the film Quiz Show because I was actually reading the words of Charles Van Doren, the main character. So it has such a fantastic resonance for me.
With Redfern, the 60s is kind of like his kind of rise. So before that, he did heaps of kind of TV.
Yes.
I think he did Twilight Zone, Alfred
So,
Hitchcock,
yeah.
and Hour, all that stuff. So the 60s comes along and he does a bunch of movies there. Barefoot in the Park, which I think he did on stage as well because he was a stage
Yes.
actor as
Yeah.
well around that time. But then you have some really pivotal movies. One of them, I think, The Chase with Brando
Mm,
in it. I think it was
mm.
fantastic.
That's
But
right.
the big one, I think, was 69 with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I mean, up until then, he was like known, but Butch Cassidy made him a star. It really did because not only like is he fantastic in the film, but him with Paul Newman. And I think at first, like he was kind of like a sidekicky kind of character. You could see it that way because it's like Butch Cassidy and Sundance. But by
Yes,
the end of the film, they're like equal, like in
absolutely.
just in every way. And it's still like George Roy Hill, way he did with that movie. Excuse me. It's still fantastic, and also one of the great endings, of course. In any of the younger people out there, and my demographic does skew a little higher, like people like in the 30s, 40s. But anyone out there who hasn't seen it yet, I really recommend you check this movie out. It's so good. And I think that was a movie, right? That's the one that kind of propelled him
Yeah.
into becoming the Redford that we kind of know in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just it's honestly the single star making turn for Redford. Newman was already well known. He
Yeah.
was a star. Um, I think they decided to cast the two together. I think there's a sense in the studio, George Roy Hill, um, that if we put these two guys together, what might happen? And there's a lovely story that's told by William Goldman in a great book, if people are interested, called Adventures in the Screen Trade. Goldman was one of the great
Mm,
screenwriters of the 60s and 70s. And Goldman says, they're in a production meeting, and Redford comes in, and he'd never met Redford, and he said, "I couldn't believe the charisma of this guy." He came, he was this young guy, and he thought, this has got to be the most charismatic person I'd ever seen. And then Paul Newman walked in and said, Newman then trumped Redford. And
mm.
there was a sense that if we put these two guys together, what might happen? What kind of chemistry could emerge? And I agree with you. Anybody who watches Butch Cassidy, Butch Cassidy today is not part of what I'd call that amazing new wave of revisionist westerns of the 60s and early 70s, like The Wild Bunch, for example, or it's Bonnie and Clyde is a kind of a prohibition kind of western. But what that gives you is this formula for what I'm going to broadly call the buddy genre. The kind of, we talk
Absolutely.
about
Yeah.
buddy cops, and that's not really that much about whether it's a Western or whether it's a cop film or a thriller. It's about the chemistry between the two leads. And when you watch them together, there's a timing, there's a chemistry. They also know that they're different. I think Paul Newman is much more rugged and he can be kind of sharp and more abrasive. Redford is a clean cut figure and they play so in a sense Butch Cassidy in another sense is kind of archetypal, the odd couple, right? Because they're
Mm.
so different, but they play so beautifully off each other. And then of course they go to the Sting, so it's kind of all set at that moment.
It is funny, like we're talking about the Sting. So 73, oh sorry, 74. Was it 73 or 74? I'm just having a look now. 73. They
Yeah.
do the Sting. Again, George Roy Hill. Again, Paul Newman. But Sting was like more Redford at the front of that movie. Like he brought Paul Newman onto that one. And again, another fantastic movie. The thing that I always find kind of funny is that when people talk about the great like tandems, duos in like cinema, like
Yeah.
Newman and Redford are always mentioned, but they only did two films together,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Fascinating.
incredible to think about because the chemistry is so strong with them two, and they're two movies that did do are such landmark films and such entertaining films that people tend to forget that the output from them was just down to these two movies, and it's kind of like it really is a tragedy that when I was thinking all the way back when Paul Newman died, I was like, it was just a damn shame we didn't get like one more
No, yes.
from them, you know?
Give them
And
Macy in their career.
yeah,
Been lovely.
yeah,
Yeah.
wouldn't have been great to kind of seen like I don't know, like an old man in the gun style kind of movie where both a little older or something. It didn't happen, but
Well,
of
they
course, the
could have
chemistry between the two is
reprised
fantastic.
something like a later Butch Cassidy. I think of the way Eastwood was able to really parlay that whole earlier era of the Western into, Unforgiven, one of the greatest films ever made. It would have been wonderful for Redford and Newman to get together to kind
Mhm.
of reflect on those two, there are only two movies, you're right, Butch Cassidy and The Sting. But wow, they have an impact, right? And also, I think they're not just two films where the chemistry overrides everything else. They are two exceptionally good films. And The Sting remains for me perhaps the greatest caper movie ever made in Hollywood. I mean, you go a long way today to see a film like that because it's so convoluted, it's so precise in the plotting, and the chemistry between the two is just elevated by um, the fact that formally the film is just exceptionally well made. George Roy Hill was a
Yeah.
great film.
The 70s was like, okay, he's in the stratosphere now.
Yes.
The films we talked to Sting, Jeremiah Johnson, of course. I think a lot of people know more the meme of Jeremiah Johnson than like the movie, but it's a fantastic film. Or The President's Man, which you just talked about, which I mean, you mentioned before, one of the great like America. I 100% agree that I think it was the best film of that year, and that year had some great films, and definitely it's that film that I think when first time I watched it again like 10 times in a row because there's so many nuances to kind of pick up on it, right?
Yeah.
And what I really loved about Redford is that he knew very much who he was, not only as an actor, but kind of like as a person and a personality. There's this funny story. I don't know if you heard about this. When Mike Nichols was casting for The Graduate.
Yes, I didn't.
Um, so before Hoffman came on to play the lead role, so Redford was kind of like might do it. And Mike Nichols asked him, what have you, did you ever have an occasion when like, a girl kind of turned you down? And Redford was kind of like, what do you mean? It's like he couldn't fathom it. It's like, no, I mean, no. And
Yeah.
that's when Nichols though, no, you can't play this role then. And funny enough, it's kind of like one of those what I call sliding doors moments
Yeah.
because if Hoffman wasn't in that film, he wouldn't become the big star
Doesn't
that
get
he
Midnight
became
Cowboy.
either.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't be in, All the President's Men like 7 years later, right? But yeah, it's the 70s were great. I mean, other films in there, oh, what's the political one that he did? Was it The Contender? Was
Oh,
it
The Candidate,
The Candidate? Yep.
which
Gatsby was another one.
yes, 3 Days of the
And
Concord. as well is absolutely amazing.
75, Sidney Pollack.
Yeah,
I think he did like numerous films of Sidney Pollack, right? Maybe like four or five, maybe more.
yeah, because he ends up doing stuff in the 80s with Pollock as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Um,
mean, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. The 70s is an enormous decade for him. It's also, I think, the moment where he's trying not to just be the leading man. And I really
yeah.
like that in Redford. To do all the President's Men, you're kind of putting yourself out there. At that moment, firstly, you are aligning yourself with an anti-Republican establishment.
Mm,
There's no other way to identify. If you're going to make that film and you're going to play Bob Woodward, who was maybe the most famous journalist in America at that time because he published the book All the President's Men, you're pretty much saying something. And I think that's the moment when American Hollywood particularly starts to understand that Redford is a sort of interesting political and critical commentator on America. And then he does, as 3 Days of the Condor is great, but he's part of that, they call it the Paranoia trilogy. There's
mm,
Clues, 3 Days of the Condor, and Parallax View, which is the great
mm.
Warren Beatty movie. Those people all knew each other, and they were coming up at an amazing moment where they were critiquing government, the establishment. There were conspiracies about who was controlling what. And I love that Redford was kind of in the middle of it. He was not a director yet, but he was picking projects where he wanted to have a say in where things were going to go.
Hi guys, Matt here from Matt's Movie Reviews, letting you know that the Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel has launched channel membership. This provides exclusive videos and other cool stuff as well for all channel members. It's under one tier, one price, and with that one price you get exclusive reviews. For example, I'll be going through the American Film Institute's top 100 movies. So every week I'll do a new review based on that movie list. You can get exclusive reviews based on your requests. Request a movie review and I will review it for you. You'll also get exclusive content for behind the scenes stuff as well. You also get exclusive interviews that I haven't posted yet as part of my podcast, like older interviews with Academy Award winners and other great filmmakers and actors as well, and a bunch of other cool stuff as well. I hope you can all join up, be part of this great experience I have an offer for you. Support indie content creators, support a movie critic like myself who is trying to make it through the content creator space. Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel memberships. Please join and get some great exclusive content. And for people out there who were thinking just how big a star he was, in 1974, so Gatsby's out, Sting is still out, and
Yes.
because the Sting was out, they re-released Butch Cassidy,
Oh, wow.
and all three films were in the box office top 10 at the same time. And that
That's a
was just like only like I think that feat wasn't achieved since like the 1940s or something, and
wow.
he was the lead in like all three of those films, and that's how big of a star he was. But then, of course, it comes down to that kind of that joke like actors have where I want to direct, and some of them do, and it doesn't work. Some of them do, and it turns out phenomenally. And the first go that Redford has with Ordinary People was just that. And that was a film to me that I didn't watch that film until maybe 2, 3 years ago. For a long time, I haven't seen it, and it was always a film to me where it was kind of like a curious kind of footnote in that the same year that Raging Bull was out and all these other, then this film wins that I never saw before, and Redford won best director over Scorsese, and I kind of never got it, and then I watched the film. It's a fantastic movie. It really is. It deals with some really heavy issues as well, but he gets great performances out of the whole cast. I mean, Donald Sutherland, Mary Tyler Moore, who was like America's sweetheart, he turned her into like the number one villain of that year for
Yeah, and
sure.
I think she got
Um,
nominated as well. So that was a
he
huge
did.
catapulting moment for her.
Timothy Dutton wins as well for supporting actor, but really he's the lead in the film. And it just starts this directing career where once again he knows what films he wants to do, they're very selective, but a lot of time they run with his passion. So has after I think Ordinary People was kind of like more of a like a personable thing. I don't know if it was based on the book or not, but pretty much every movie after that had to either do with environmentalism in some way or
Yes.
politics after that as well. But and not every film hit that he directed, but there's a number of them. We mentioned Quiz Show, River Runs Through It was another one. Horse Whisperer was a big hit when it came out. Yeah, I mean, I think he was just really just a fantastic director as well in
Oh
his
yeah.
career.
I mean, this is the interesting thing in that he is a really notable director. He's not Scorsese, for example, right? Or
Yeah,
he's not some of these directors that became um, identified with an entire movement. And yet, when those films you just mentioned, so he does Ordinary People, which, as you say, it's an extraordinary movie. I mean, I know that people have sometimes judged it harshly because that was the year of Raging Bull, and it was the year that Scorsese didn't win. And a lot of people say, well, this was a travesty.
mm,
It's still an amazing film in American film history. It's also a time when Hollywood was making a lot of, you know, I don't want to call it, I don't, when I say melodrama, I don't want to say that in a negative way, but these are dramas with intense emotional, fields, right? So when you watch Ordinary People, as you say, it's a devastating work. And it reminds me of things like Kramer versus Kramer, for example, which is a Dustin
yeah.
Hoffman Street film, where you watch it and you think, wow, this is actually painful to watch. And yet it was a major Hollywood film. So Ordinary People was a huge movie. It won a lot of awards. It doesn't maybe doesn't have the legacy. As you say, a lot of people don't know it, right? So they might know other Redford. But then he, at that moment, he's a very serious director, and he does quiz show, which gets nominated for everything, doesn't win him the awards, but I remember vividly the contemporary criticism of it at the time. The response was, this is a major American work in the grand tradition of All the President's Men. And just to be spoken of in that way, the other thing is, there's a really great cameo by Scorsese in Quiz Show at the end.
There is, yeah.
And there's a funny kind of gag here where the head of the kind of the corrupt bodies of the corporation is played by Martin Scorsese. And I like that. For me, Redford is kind of gesturing to another great auteur. Like
Mm,
we are part of the same project in forming what Hollywood, could do, the really political stuff Hollywood could do. So River Runs Through It was a massive hit. Very young Brad Pitt. If people haven't seen it, go and check it out. Horse Whisperer, again, fairly big hit. So Redford was relevant. And now we're talking several decades of relevance. He's getting older. He doesn't star in as many things. He does a couple of late kind of romantic films, but his presence is still so assured. And of course, then he's contributing to film culture across
yeah.
America.
I mean, and a big part of that is the Sundance Film Festival. I think it was like 1978. I'm just looking at my notes
Yes.
here when it was, yeah, 78 is when it was like first launched. It was known as the Utah US Film Festival, then became the US
Yeah.
Film Festival. 84 is when it's called Sundance. Sundance, of course, named after, his character in Butch Cassidy. Um, it's an institute within itself, and the number of filmmakers that benefited from that film festival dedicated to independent film, which I think was incredibly necessary because, of course, he's a guy coming out from the 1970s after, and while you could say he wasn't really part of kind of like the new wave auteurs and such, he was a part of it as an actor. And then you
Yes.
go into the 80s and the studio system kind of like come back in full force, right? And I'm sure he's looking at a lot of filmmakers out there going, we need to give these guys a chance, like we got a chance. And that's what he did. And I mean, you got to think about it. There wouldn't be any Soderbergh, there wouldn't be a Chris Nolan, there wouldn't be Guillermo del Toro. The number of filmmakers that benefited from Sundance is in itself. The If you just had that on its own,
Exactly. I mean, that's a really good
that's
point.
fantastic.
I think that could be the biggest part of his legacy,
Hmm.
Sundance, because there's a really great interview he did. I can't remember when it was. I think it was maybe early 80s. Because as you say, I think you're spot on, which is there was this incredible moment in 1970s where all these independent auteur type people are doing fascinating things. But it is true, and whether for good or bad, Hollywood starts making a lot of blockbusters and they
Hmm.
make a lot of money. And it gets harder for people to make their films if they're individualistic or they're a bit experimental and they don't fit the mainstream. And there's a great interview where Robert Redford said he wanted to create an environment where he was going to make it hard for the studios because there would be all this amazing content coming through, and the studios would feel, how do we become part of this? And it's incredible that he was able to achieve this. And a lot of people think of Sundance as the Tarantinos or the Paul Thomas Andersons and so on. But as you say, Sundance goes back to 78, prior to being even titled Sundance. And he was building independent cinema all the way through. And it's a testament now that, what are we talking, 40 years? Am I right? My maths is not probably brilliant, but we're
Yeah.
looking at a lot of time, right? And Sundance remains, look, film festivals have changed a lot. But Sundance has not, in my opinion, wholeheartedly gone the way of the
Mm.
glamorous mega blockbuster. Cannes is now a blockbuster festival for, in many ways. Sundance still feels to me to have this cachet that says, we want to find you if you're an innovative, independent artist. And it's hard to get found, but that's what we champion. And that was really Robert Redford. Look, obviously, Robert Redford made an Avengers movie at one point, but nonetheless, his commitment was to a kind of independence, and that's what Sundance did for all of these great filmmakers that you and I now love.
Throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s, he was still acting. I mean, and the thing was, the stuff that he was in, what like everyone like, that was either critical or a financial hit. I'd probably argue probably up to probably around, I don't know, Lions for Lambs when that came out,
Yeah.
because 2005, whatever it was, but the one he directed with Tom Cruise and Meryl Streep, it didn't
Yes, I
really
remember it. Yep.
do what people wanted. But if you're just looking at movies like The Natural, which is one of the early Redford movies I kind of remember seeing on TV a lot, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
impact that had, and also the gumption of Robert Redford to say, "Yeah, I can play the 15-year-old version for me," and I like the other version as well. People tend to forget that when he's
yeah.
in the earlier scenes, he's supposed to be quite the
He's
character's supposed to
very
be quite
young.
young,
Yeah,
but it's just him, and you're like, he's one of those kind of guys where the charisma is so strong that any type of rational kind of thought into certain character traits can be pushed aside. Someone similar to that was like Sean Connery. Like, he can play a Russian naval commander, even though he's still got his Scottish accent, the same kind of thing. There's those kind of actors, and that's what he did with that movie, The Natural. Barry Levinson's film had such an impact as well on just the sport film.
yes,
And when people talk the magic of baseball, that someone like Kevin Costner will take on later on, in the 80s as well. A lot of that comes back to that movie. And then you have Out of Africa again, Sidney Pollack. That was a
yes.
huge movie as well. And
That
then
winning
he
all the
go ahead.
Oscars. Yeah.
All the Oscars in
Yeah.
1985.
Yes.
Except for him. I think he was the only one who didn't get nominated.
He did get nominated. I mean, this is always,
Yeah.
and he's playing opposite Meryl Streep, of course, and Meryl Streep is, an amazing actor, and she wins, but he doesn't even get nominated. And again, his
Mm,
career kind of shows that, for whatever reason, he was never perceived to be the actor. He was always perceived to be the leading man, and that is
yeah.
the romantic leading man in a major epic. But it is true that for the Blixen role that Meryl Streep did, she wins the Oscar, and many people say it's one of her greatest roles ever. But kind of unfortunate that he doesn't get recognized even to be nominated.
And the funny thing is, he only was nominated once, The Sting, and that's it.
Yes.
Which again is just kind of crazy to me, because there's opportunity for that to happen. Maybe on his part, he just didn't want to do the whole campaigning aspect.
Yeah.
I don't know. But there's even later day films that we'll talk about where he could have been nominated too, but didn't happen.
I agree.
Another one, another big one, I think, not, I wouldn't say in regards to maybe quality of film, but mainstream success, especially culture stuff, was Indecent Proposal. And
Oh,
that's
yes.
when we start getting older man. Like,
Yes.
he's now getting into that phase where he's kind of like, working with younger actors, he's playing an older guy. I think that was a really huge film for the 90s because it kept him relevant, I think, in it for a lot of younger people, because the movie had Demi Moore, Woody Harrison. You had that huge song from Sade that was all over
Yes.
everywhere, and the film clip from that as well. I used to love watching Rage, and I don't know if you remember back in the 90s and late 80s, there was programs called Video Hits, Video Smash Hits,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
it played like
absolutely. On Saturday mornings.
Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
used to love watching that because to me, it kind of felt like I was kind of like watching previews of movies because whenever
yeah,
there's a song about a movie, they show heaps of clips from the
yeah,
movies.
yeah, yeah.
And I used to always love that, which is something that's really missing these days, I think, as well.
Oh, completely.
So yeah, that was a huge thing. And then you have Spy Game in the 2000s, again with Brad Pitt, who some people, I think, as Pitt gets older, kind of see him as kind of like an heir apparent to
Yeah,
Redford.
I've
He
heard that.
doesn't direct, but he is a player behind the game with Plan B Productions. He does some really
Yeah.
big films. He's won Oscars for the stuff
He's
he's done
produced,
produced.
his company has produced some very major works. I mean, I remember when he was a major producer and really, to be honest, the instrument of getting it done, the Terrence Malick movie Tree of Life, which people would
Yeah.
never associate with Brad Pitt. But yeah, he's in the film. I think it was originally going to be Heath Ledger, and then Ledger died very
Mm.
tragically. And the only way they got the movie made is that Pitt, kind of in an act of desperation, agreed to play the character. But he was always supportive of that as a producer. So, I mean, I see the relationship between Pitt and Redford. I think this is also the Hollywood changes. I think Redford
Mm.
is from a very different era, right? I think Redford is rubbing shoulders with the great Hollywood auteurs.
Mm.
Whereas Pitt is, for me, primarily the movie. Even as a producer, he's far more in the background. I don't see Pitt ever directing a film, for example. I
No,
just
no.
think that doesn't feel like it's in his bones. Whereas for Redford, it makes perfect sense because even on All the President's Men, I've seen interviews with Alan Pakula who directed it, and he talks about the fact that Redford was one of the key creative people on set, not even on set, on working the script. I think Redford was co-developing the script with Goldman at the time. So Redford was actually one of the progenitors of the project. And I don't think Pitt is that sort of a figure in Hollywood.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. Yeah. I mean, I think some of that comes from there's a uncanny resemblance sometimes when you look at Brad Pitt now, who's in his 60s now, I guess, and like there's a kind of like a similarity in that they're both kind of like the pin-up guy, the
Yeah.
good-looking leading man guy. But the movies that they chose and the way they go about went about their career with the actors that they work with, there's similarities there in that they could have coasted just on their looks alone, but they wanted to do really kind of intelligent works and work with great filmmakers. And I think there's similarity there as well between the two.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah. Later roles with Redford, and two of my favorites actually in his whole career.
Mm.
And again, when you look at his filmography as an actor, it's actually quite not as big as you think it was.
No,
I
no.
imagine because the 90s was quite small, 2000s and such even more. I imagine because he was, directing more and doing more stuff with Sundance, and he had a lot of interest in environmentalism and political activism, etc.
Yes.
But one film I really want to talk about, which is I think my favorite of all his performances,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
All Is Lost, the
Yes.
J.C. Chandler movie. I absolutely love that film. Number one, he hardly speaks in the film because it's
I
just
know.
it's pretty much for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's him on a yacht and he's stuck in like a tropical storm and he's trying to survive essentially. And a lot of the time he's just on his own, so he doesn't have a Wilson to bounce off like Tom Hanks does in Castaway.
This is
But
between Castaway
yeah.
and that film. Yeah, he doesn't have the Wilson.
Doesn't have the Wilson, so it's just him on his own. So a lot of it will be internal, but he is so charismatic as an actor. And by that time, of course, this is like 2009, I think it came out. He knows all the tools, he knows all the tricks, he knows he's a master of his craft, and he pulls off this performance where he's on screen all the time, just him, the boat, the ocean, and I just think it's absolutely an incredible performance. Do you have any thoughts about that movie?
Yeah, and I do. I agree. I think it's one of his best films. I also was struck that when it first appeared, there was a lot of talk about it. That Redford has done something really massive here. That it's a different kind of performance that people were not expecting from him. in the
Mm.
sort of latter stages of his career. As you said, he'd been doing so much with Sundance. He'd been involved in various kinds of directing projects. So then he does that a bit later. The talk was that it was going to be a significant film at the Oscars. And then it kind of petered out, and I always felt disappointed in that because it kind of reminds me of a classic form of American film where it's, the archetypal man versus the elements.
Mm.
And that's such an enduring American, I'm kind of thinking of Moby Dick, right, as the kind of
Yeah.
primal version of that. Um, but then it doesn't have the reputation, it doesn't have the legacy or the long lastingness of his earlier work. And I think that is unfortunate because a lot of people have missed it. I'm surprised he didn't get much more attention for the performance because it is a really staggering performance. To be on screen all the time is, there are very, very few films and very, very few movie stars who would give themselves over to that kind of role.
I remember at the time because it was an independent film and a lot of awards season, it
Yeah.
depends on the push behind a studio. They got to put the money to get the press appearances and marketing and everything else stuff. And whatever the studio was for all his life just didn't have it because they just
Yes.
couldn't afford it, you know. But I remember there was a push by actors and producers at the time to try to get, campaign for it. And Redford, like, he's like, I'm not campaigning for anything. Like, I did the work, it's out there. You guys do what you want. And and again, I think it comes back to the lack of noms while he's involved, while he was involved politically, like in the pure sense of the word, into like American politics, I don't think he was as much involved politically as in trying to do like, Hollywood studio kind of like, the very kind of I don't mean to bring his name, but Weinstein kind of style,
Yeah.
kind of like shenanigans behind the scenes, right? It was just wasn't his style. I think he had more class at that. And I know there's some people who didn't like. I know you mentioned Goldman before,
Oh, yeah.
and I know he had not nice things to say about Redford at times because
Yes.
Redford liked to come in and say it's a good script, but we're changing this, we're doing
Absolutely.
that, we're
Redford
doing
was
that, right?
hands off in every way.
Hands on all the time, and that rubbed him the wrong way a lot. But when it came to stuff to do with like politically being a political player to try to get some type of recognition, I'm sure he's like, I'm Robert Redford. I don't need that. I've got my Oscar. I've I've done these movies and by that time he's like that'd be 2009. So how old would we be? So 14 years from now, like 75 or so. He's like, I'm 75. I'm good. But yeah, it is a shame that not many people know about it. But I really do hope that people seek it out because to me, it's his best performance.
It's an amazing work, and I like what you say because one of the things I respect about Redford is that he is from another era. So that whole kind of Miramax moment of we're going to try and get an Oscar at all costs because
Mm,
we get the Oscar, it'll boost our box office. We even try a re-release to get additional revenue. Um, I think that would have been absurd to Redford, to go on the junket tour and try to get himself an Oscar. Um, and I think it's a testament to, I don't know, a sort of humility in that old sense of the work is the object. It's not
yeah.
the Oscar, it's the work itself. I think he was very pleased with the performance. As you said, it was lauded by a lot of people, a lot of his contemporaries, also a lot of people that admired Redford kind of did describe it as the greatest performance of Redford. So I think that would have been really meaningful for him.
Another great film that came out a little after that was Old Man in the Gun,
Yes.
David Lowery. And it's kind of like it's really interesting because it is based on a true story of this kind of this old like older bank robber. But to me, it really felt like a Redford tribute movie in a
Yeah.
certain way, and everything about that we love about him, whether and it's really interesting is that it took the young Redford and the old Redford and kind of mashed them together in the
Yeah.
one movie. And at that time, I mean, technically, you still call it his last. It is his last leading performance. He did make a cameo in Avengers Endgame, like a little kind of thing there for 3 minutes, but I don't know if that counts or not. But Old Man and the Gun is technically kind of like his last kind of like big kind of goodbye kind of thing. And it did feel like that when I was watching it. It felt like I was watching this and I was thinking to myself, yeah, that's the man. That's
Yeah.
Redford right there. And again, it's a fantastic performance from him.
And I think you're right. It has this kind of gesture to reflecting on his past, in
Mm,
terms of the way the film looks, the way it's set, the fact that it riffs on some of these aspects of the Western, etc. It feels a little bit like it's nodding its hat itself to, Butch Cassidy, his background, how he developed in the 60s and 70s. So I have a soft spot for it as well because I think it means a lot to see him in that way, where it is the young Redford. But I always think there's a sort of pathos when older actors who were legendary as younger actors do these older roles. Connery sometimes did some interesting things in that way, when he does films like The Rock and he's doing some sort of action you can't help but also see him as a much younger person as well. And I do think
mm.
there's a lovely kind of emotional resonance there. But for Redford, that was really late, right, for him. And I think there's something special in the fact that he just even got to make the role and offer that performance.
We hit a lot of the kind of key Redford performances here, the things in his career. Is there any unsung movies or performances that you've seen, maybe anything he's directed, anything
Mm,
that like he's acted in that you would encourage someone? Like if someone said, "Hey, I like Redford, I've seen this and this and this," and you go, "Oh, you need to see this."
yes.
Which what is that this you think you would recommend for people? Because I
Okay.
got a couple of my own.
You got a couple. Okay. I There's a film I love, but it depends on people's taste, right? Called The Hot Rock.
Hmm.
So this is a 70s. So Redford is huge at this point. I think he's just done maybe All the President's Men. And a lot of people forget that Hollywood had kind of weird, conflicted ideas at that time. So there was political films, very serious films like All the President's Men, or The Conversation, or The Paradox View. But then in another way, they were making these kind of caper movies. So that was a big deal in the 70s. So Redford makes a film called The Hot Rock. He's the star. Um, I can't remember who directed it. It wasn't Redford, but it's about it's about a bunch of misfits. To be honest, they kind of when the film starts, it's got one of the great opening sequences where Redford is being released from jail,
Mm,
and it's very catchy. It's got a jazz. It's an old era where they were doing jazz soundtracks. It's very,
yeah.
very catchy. Redford is so charismatic. I'm not going to say it's a perfect film, but what it does is it pushes Redford into this wacky genre of
Right.
silly characters. And my favorite character is played by George Segal, who's just a nutcase. So if you get a chance and you're looking for something fun, but again, it's got that star-making turn of Redford, and you like heist movies. So I should say, I love heist films. Okay, so The Hot Rock, I think, is a great Redford movie that a lot of people won't have heard of, let alone seen.
So I'm just looking at it now. Peter Yates was a
Pretty
director.
Yates.
He
Okay.
did Bullet as
Big
well.
Bullet, right? Yeah.
Um, yeah. 72 is when it came out.
Okay, so it's
So
so interesting that he's massive. He can do anything he
yeah,
wants, and he chooses this film. So have a look just because he chose it.
I definitely want to because I do like the movies of Peter Yates, and it doesn't surprise me that it has a jazzy soundtrack because I remember
Yes,
there are moments in Bullet where like he goes to like McQueen would go
absolutely.
to a jazz club and it would just be like someone playing some jazz music all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I got two picks. One of them is a film called Brubaker. It's a
Oh
one
yeah,
where he plays
yeah. Another
That
one.
was the one where he plays the warden that goes undercover in the jail.
Yes.
Because I remember I was watching it and I was like really so I was like, oh, he's the warden, like that's awesome, and trying to find corruption within there. That's a great movie. So that came out in 1980, so the same year that Ordinary People came out.
Yeah.
Another one which I was a fan of and it used to be on TV all the time when I was growing up,
Mm.
Sneakers.
Oh yeah, I
You're talking
remember
about
this.
Remember
Yeah.
that one? Heist film. How about this for a cast? So you got Redford, Ben Kingsley, Sidney Poitier, River Phoenix, David Strathairn, Mary McDonald, Dan Aykroyd. Great cast. It's a
Yes.
great kind of like slick kind of like heist movie as well. That I really enjoyed and I thought that he was fantastic in it. And it's really fun as well to watch Sidney Poitier do something because a lot of the movies he did was very kind of like very he played very kind of strong characters, leading man
Yeah. Kind of
characters,
social
with the
commentary.
exception. Yeah, with the exception, I mean, he did do those he did direct Bill Cosby in those movies in the 70s, right? Those Black
He
Exploitation
also
ones. So
directed Richard Pryor in and Gene Wilder in Stir Crazy, which
that's right, yeah.
in that, check out
Yeah.
Stir Crazy.
Love Stir Crazy.
Stir Crazy is
Um,
amazing.
so, so it's really cool to see Sidney Poitier in this movie, kind of like just like he's playing kind of like a stern character, but at the same time, there's really good kind of comedic moments with him and Redford and other people. But Sneakers, yeah, that came out in 1992, so that's another one people should
Yeah. And can I say,
really
Matt,
check out as well.
Sneakers is absolutely riffing on parts of the Hot Rock.
Oh yeah, yeah, right.
So Sneakers, he's kind of the guy that's corralling all these people together. We got to do this thing. So that's what the Hot Rock is. It's I got to
Hmm.
assemble a team. We got to get this thing, and it's going to be very hard to get in to get it. We have to get this voice recognition thing going. So Sneakers is a kind of really playful gesture to that 70s sort of movie.
So when it's all said and done, and it's been a few days, since Robert Redford passed away at the age of 89. Um, What do you think if we're going to look back, say, I don't know, in a year from now, we talk about Redford, what's the first thing we think about him? I mean, is it going to be the movies? Is it going to be Sundance? Is it going to be, I mean, I think like myself, the number one thing I'm always going to always think of is kind of like that moments in movies like All the President's Men where he you watch him and you think he's a pretty face, but then there's moments in that movie, there's nuances, there's moments how he handles the characters, and that's when you see that this guy has got real substance to go along with his style. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that he had. He was a movie star, but he was
Yes.
a movie star with a lot of substance to him. And I think that intelligence really showcased itself within the artistry, and I think that's something that I really take from
Yeah.
Robert Redford.
I love that word movie star. I actually think movie stars usually are incredibly substantial figures, right? They tend to be intelligent, they pick interesting roles. So I'm not yet necessarily talking about, the incredibly handsome blonde guy that was going to be able to open any film at the box office. But I think what I take from Redford is also partially about sadness, in that I think he represents a movie star that really doesn't exist now, and we will not
Mm,
produce anything like that. And the reason being, the way we now consume media and entertainment is so much more dispersed and diffuse. Redford was a guy who was working with the studios, creating his own independent life, in making films and starting a festival. And we could align him with a certain moment in American history. So for me, it's always going to be him and Deep Throat in the garage,
right.
in All the President's Men. It's always going to be follow the money. What does that mean? How far does this go? Because that scene is not just that scene. That scene is then David Duchovny in the X-Files. They were directly
Mm.
appropriating that from Redford to create a whole new generation of conspiracy theory. So I think it's a kind of he's a voice of a certain moment in Hollywood. And I just don't think people can have voices like that anymore because things are just so hard to get a handle on.
They are, and I'm I just think he was one of the greats. He really was, and it's such a shame he passed away. However, to pass away, he had a good run. Age
Yeah,
of
for sure.
89,
An amazing career.
amazing career. He made an impact on and off the screen, and I think that's something, if someone would look back, say what your legacy is, I imagine a lot of people say just try to make an impact with the people around me, and he did that, and he went even beyond that. He made an impact with millions of people. So rest in peace, Robert Redford. And for everyone out there listening, Bruce Isaacs has the podcast Film versus Film, season 4, available now. I'm going to have the link down in the show notes. Bruce, I thank you so very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to talk all things Robert Redford with you, and hopefully we can talk again in the future. It's been a pleasure.
I would love that, Matt. Lovely talking to you, and thanks again for the invite.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.